Hello, I'm Julia Fisher. Welcome to this week's edition of The Olive Tree, bringing you up-to-date news and interviews from Israel to find out what God is doing there and the wider Middle East at this time. With Iran so much in the news regarding its nuclear capabilities and threat to Israel, you'll be interested to hear some good news from that country. My guest today is David Davis, a pastor who lives in the north of Israel. He recently addressed a conference in Jerusalem just before Yom Kippour, and it was there he heard from an Iranian pastor about the numbers of Iranians who are currently becoming Christians. Here's what he had to say.
It's illegal to have a satellite dish in Iran. People have them by the millions all over Iran, and the government sends trucks around that have devices where they try to break up the signal and so on. But two Iranian evangelists I know that have 24/7 Christian television going into Iran, their messages are on there 4 or 5 times a day, so the government can't stop it, even though they try to break up the signal and so on. So it's overwhelming, the gospel going into Iran. Let me give you an example. An Iranian Muslim woman went on her satellite television, and she was looking at channels, and there was the Jesus film was being shown in Parsi in the Persian language. Jesus' film is the book of Luke that's been used all over the world for decades to reach people with the gospel. And so she's watching the book of Luke. She's watching the Jesus film in her language. And she says, "Oh, he's so wonderful. He cares about the poor. Look at that. Look, he stopped the wave. He stopped the winds. Oh, he raised the dead. Jesus is so wonderful." And she was like falling in love with Jesus, seeing who he was for the first time. Then she says, "Oh, no, they killed him. Oh, my God, they killed him. Oh, no, why did they kill him?" Then she says, "Oh, he's alive. He came back from the dead. Hallelujah." And so she's watching the gospel for the first time, and she's just in awe of who Jesus is. And then the evangelist on the television says, "If anyone hears my voice and opens his door, I will come in and sup with him and he with me, and so on, have fellowship with him." So the woman hears a knock on her door. She goes over and opens the door, and Jesus is standing there. And she invites him in, and he shares who he is. She becomes a believer. Jesus disappears, and the television is still on. The evangelist is saying, "If you would like more information about this Jesus, call this number." So she calls the number, and she says to the person answering the phone, "I just saw Jesus." And the person answering the phone says, "Well, did you like the film?" She said, No, you don't understand. I just saw him. He walked into my apartment." And these kinds of things are happening all over the Muslim world. For instance, some believers in Afghanistan got an old vehicle and filled it up with Persian Bibles, with Iranian Bibles. And they were going to drive over the mountains into Iran. And as they drove up the mountains late at night one night, this old vehicle they had that was filled with Bibles and covered over so you couldn't see them, the steering broke. So they, on this steep mountain road, they couldn't drive anymore, so they stopped. So as they sat there in the dark, there was a knock on the window of the van, and they were terrified. And they slowly rolled the window down, and there's an old man standing there saying, "Did you bring the books?" And they said, "Well, what books? What do you mean?" He said, "Well, Jesus has been appearing to us in this village here where I'm an elder every night for the people there for the last week. And he told me to come here and wait, and somebody would bring me books that would explain who he is and all how we can follow him." Wow. So, I mean, things like this are happening all the time. When we go to do this television show live, I'm going to hear more stories from my friend who has this TV show. And he had been a supporter of the Ayatollahs in the late 70s and used to chant, "Death to the great Satan America, and death to the little Satan Israel," and so on. And then in his testimony, he said, I realized I need some education, so I'm going to America. He goes to America. He's going to university in California, and he gets saved. And he planted the largest Iranian church in California, probably in America. And he used to be a follower of the Ayatollah, and now he has this television show that goes into his nation.
It's just
so things like this are happening all over the Middle East. I mean, the Lord's appearing to Muslims. You can't keep up with it all. It's amazing.
It's wonderful to hear those stories, David, but at the same time, you're living in Israel, you're living under the threat of war, a threat from Iran, and you've also just started to celebrate the new season of the biblical feast. So, I mean, how do you hold all these things in tension?
Well, it was interesting. My wife and I just came back from Australia and did some conferences out there. Australia is huge and wonderful people, and they're selling land and they want immigrants to come, and it's like just gigantic place. And there's peace, and they have their social problems, but it's a very peaceful place. So we leave that environment, and we fly into Israel. And as we get here, the country was preparing for Rosh Hashanah, which is the agricultural New Year, which has just started, and where we give honey and apples to one another and pray, at least say to them, have a good year, have a sweet year, not a bitter year, and so on. And it's a big cultural feast, a 2-day feast. And so everybody was preparing for that, but also at the same time, we were preparing for war. The government has distributed gas masks again, and all kinds of other things the government is doing. There are massive air raid exercises and practices all over the country. The hospitals are getting prepared. Rambam Hospital here in Haifa, the largest one in the north, have just completed and dedicated a 3-story parking area underneath Rambam, which will be safe from missiles. And Rambam is right down on the Mediterranean Sea on an area called, of all things, Quiet Beach. So the irony of Rambam being on Quiet Beach, and they made this huge parking lot in 3 layers, and within 48 hours, the hospital can turn it into an emergency hospital for 2,000 beds. The walls collapse, come down, all the equipment comes out, and it's all been tested, and it's ready to go. So Rambam and the different hospitals are getting ready for war. And on the top of Rambam Hospital, here in Haifa, we're 25 miles from Hezbollah, who have 70,000 rockets aimed at us. And they just missed Rambam several times in the last war. And they have helicopter pads on the roof of Rambam where helicopters can fly in wounded civilians and soldiers. So we came back from, idyllic, quiet, peaceful Australia to Israel, this tiny little place smaller than Wales, surrounded by enemies that would like to destroy her. And everyone's preparing for the New Year's and going on as business as usual, and at the same time trying not to alarm their children with the gas masks and preparing things where they would have to leave overnight and go to the center of the country and hopefully be safe if another missile barrage hits Haifa. I've been through 2 of them, and it's quite an experience. But the Lord's watching over, and the Lord's going to take care of us. He always has.
So you're not tempted to get on the next plane out?
No, as a matter of fact, when the Gulf War started with Saddam Hussein, just before it started in 1991, we were in New York City with David Wilkerson, our spiritual father, and we got the last 2 seats on El Al to get back here before the war, because I'm a pastor and I have to be with the flock, and people get scared, and some of our people, the Hezbollah war in 2006, wouldn't come out of their bomb shelters, some of our elderly widows and so on, and so we take food to them and so on.
So David, let's talk about your flock. What is going on there at the moment? Your congregation is a mixed congregation. You have Jewish people, you have Arab people, you have Druze people who come.
Yeah.
What sort of effect does it have on a congregation when there is this threat of war hanging over you?
Well, the last war, I felt like I was more an army officer, hopefully a benevolent, kind one, who was basically explaining and training our people what we need to do when the missiles fall. And for instance, we have had exercises where our people can run to the bomb shelter in time. And for instance, up at the top of the mountain, where our worship center is, up on the very top of Mount Carmel, which that land, by the way, we were worked with the British Christians that owned it, and ended up owning all that land. So we really thank Britain for that. Part of the land was given to us free. But we have a women's shelter there, and we have African refugees and children, single mothers and orphans, and we have to train them to run for the bomb shelter if the air raid siren goes off. And so it's not easy, because we have Eritreans, Ethiopians, and Sudanese, and they all speak different languages, and they're all from different tribes. But we've rehearsed all of that. And we have generators for our buildings so that when the electricity grid goes out, we have light and power at least for 8 hours or more, and we have some fuel stocked up. And so it's Arabs and Jews together. I mean, missiles are indiscriminate who they hit. And so we've been making preparations at our drug rehab downtown, the House of Victory. We've practiced there how they get to the bomb shelter and how everything is in order there. And if need be, we will evacuate them like we did during the Hezbollah war in 2006. Too many missiles were hitting around them, and so we'll move them up to the top of the mountain where hopefully it's safer, because there's no city up there. We're in a Druze village, and it's not a military target, really. we're all in this together. We're all citizens of Israel, and we're all part of this. And
so briefly, David, how should we be praying for you and what's going on?
Well, right now we're in a fast. We started yesterday and last night, and we're fasting through Yom Kippour. In the Jewish calendar, this is referred to as the days of awe, the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah, the new year that just started, and Yom Kippur, which is a national fast day. And so we're praying for, first of all, salvations and security. We want to see our people come to the Lord. We want to see our people saved, Jews and Arabs together. We want to see the Iranians saved. We want to see them come to the Lord and meet their Messiah, Yeshua, Jesus. And whatever it takes, we want security. So we're praying for security along the northern border. We have a team of 15 people going up there tomorrow to pray over where Hezbollah is in Syria and so on. And we're praying it won't be chemical weapons and we won't need our gas masks. So yeah, my message at the conference was war in the heavenlies. There's a war going on in the earth, but there is a ferocious war going on in the heavenly places, which Revelations 12:7 talks about the war against the believers. In Daniel chapter 10, he talks about how Daniel was praying and the Lord answered, and Michael, the archangel, showed up and said that there had been a battle going on against the prince of Persia. And so we're praying against the principality, the darkness over Persia, over Iran, that has all these people in bondage to false ideology, that God would set them free and, if need be, remove the regime in any way he wants, and keep them secure and keep us secure, that there be a great, great harvest. The fullness of God's purposes will come to pass, not the enemy's purpose.
David Davis, a pastor from northern Israel. And you're listening to The Olive Tree with me, Julia Fisher. And the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund is a Christian charity based in the UK that supports the needs of both Jewish believers and Arab Christians living in Israel and the wider Middle East. So if you'd like to know more about our work and receive our free bi-monthly newsletter, please either visit our website, olivetreefund.org, or write to me, Julia Fisher, at the Olive Tree Reconciliation Fund, P.O. Box 850, Horsham, RH12 9GA in the UK. I'll be back at the same time next week for another story from the Olive Tree. Until then, goodbye.